McARTHUR.
Thank you, Peter Allen. I was born in Denver, Colorado, quite a few years before the Texaco Metropolitan opera broadcasts existed, and the only way I could hear the great stars of the Met was when they came to Denver for concerts. I was still a teenager when I heard Ponselle in a Denver recital in 1921, just a few years after her Met debut as Leonora in Verdi's La Forza del Destino. I could not believe the wonder of what I was hearing, and when she returned the following season, it seemed even greater. However, the big event of my life at that time was her third Denver recital on November 3rd, 1923. I actually made my stage concert debut that night, although I was not Rosa Ponselle's accompanist. That position was filled by Stuart Ross, who remained with her until the end of her career and who later became a close friend of mine. As usual at her recitals, the accompanist played one or two groups of solo piano selections. I was given the privilege of going on stage to raise the piano lid for Stuart's solo groups, and then after he had finished, of going out again to put the lid down. And that was my first appearance on any concert stage. This year, 1987, we celebrate the 90th anniversary of Rosa Ponselle's birth. She came into the world as Rosa Ponselle and, with her sister Carmela, began singing at an early age in vaudeville at the Palace Theater in New York. After 2 years or so, both began to study seriously, and it was then that the fairy tale begins. Caruso heard her, she auditions for the Met, and now as Rosa Ponselle is engaged for La Forza del Destino opposite Caruso and Giuseppe De Luca. It was an auspicious debut, and to remind us of that glorious voice, here is Ponselle in the opening measures of Pace Pace Mio Dio, the last act aria from Forza del Destino. I first came to New York in 1925, but it was not until a year later, in December of 1926, that I heard Ponselle on stage at the Met as Leonora in Forza. However, prior to that, I had heard her in La Gioconda and Agnes Chenier, both with Beniamino Gigli. Then came Cavalleria Rusticana, in which Ponselle displayed another side of her multifaceted talent. She had a great aptitude for the stage, for the drama in opera, and while many of her roles presented her in a stately and dignified manner, as Santuzza she was totally different. A simple, heartbroken Sicilian girl who moved us to tears as she poured out unstintingly her grief and despair. Undoubtedly, the high point of her career and one of the great evenings in Metropolitan history was her first performance in the title role of Bellini's Norma on November 16, 1927. I was lucky to be in the audience. The opera had not been given at the Met since 1891, and few in the audience had ever heard it before. Gattacazaza had assembled a great cast: Ponselle as Norma, Marion Telva Adalgisa, Giacomo Lorivolpi Polioni, and Ezio Pinza Oroveso. On the podium, guiding the whole, was the great Tullio Serafin. The preparation for that revival took months of hard work. Marion Telva, who later became a close friend of my wife and myself, told us of the rigorous schedule of rehearsals which took place at a house in Lake Placid, which Ponselle had taken for the summer. There she had Marion and their coach, Romano Romani, for daily rehearsals. Marion used to tell us about that infernal dinner bell, explaining that each morning I loved to walk around the beautiful countryside, but by mid-morning my walk would be interrupted by loud clanging of a large dinner bell Ponselle had. She would come out on the porch, clang the bell fortissimo, and that was the signal that summoned Romano and me to work. The same routine occurred every day after lunch in mid-afternoon. After such arduous weeks of preparation, it is no wonder that New Yorkers enjoyed a priceless treat on opening night. I can still see Ponselle, magnificently gowned in a flowing white dress, as she made her first act entrance, head held high with imposing dignity, and then the outpouring of that unbelievable voice in Costa Diva. Later, in 1931, Gladys Swarthout took over the role of Adalgisa. I was Swarthout's accompanist at the time, and we worked long and hard hours. But what I remember the most is the way in which Rosa gave such care and attention to Gladys in their weeks of rehearsal together. Ponselle was always a superb and thoughtful colleague. She knew full well what this meant to a younger artist like Swarthout, and she did everything she could to help Gladys make the fine success she did have. Then I remember February 2nd, 1934, when John Charles Thomas made his Metropolitan Opera debut as Germont in Verdi's La Traviata. My wife Peggy and I were in the audience, and Rosa was on stage as Violetta, working closely with John Charles and helping to make it another great afternoon. Ponselle did surprise us at times with some of her concert repertory. Being the Italian-American opera star that she was, it seemed strange to find her programming songs like Schubert's Der Erlkönig, one of the most demanding of German lieder. But she knew what she was doing. I heard her in recital when she was a guest artist in a famous series of concerts presented by the Beethoven Association in New York's Town Hall. The eminent pianist Harold Bauer was her accompanist, and she surprised all of us by her dramatic singing of that great Schubert song. It was not difficult to know who the four characters in the song were, all of whom she portrayed with different sound and color in her voice. Another great German song she often sang was Richard Strauss's Wiegenlied, and I cannot remember a recital when she failed to sing Cyril Scott's Tender Lullaby. She made classics of these songs just as she made classics of her many operatic roles. As a performer, I was backstage with Ponselle only once during my long career as an accompanist. The Harlem Philharmonic, a group of ladies who presented concerts in the Waldorf Astoria Ballroom, engaged Ponselle for a recital with the renowned Italian tenor Dino Borgioli, for whom I was the accompanist. Stuart Ross was there as usual with Ponselle. I remember her almost nervous excitement to get out on stage, almost like a racehorse waiting for the bell to sound. The final duet on the program was from La Traviata. I had the great thrill of playing this. Stuart was so generous. He stepped aside and let me, his younger colleague, have that moment. Despite her reputation as a cooperative colleague, Ponselle did have one idiosyncrasy which drove other prima donnas up the wall. At the old Metropolitan Opera House, the gentlemen's dressing rooms were on one side of the stage, the ladies on the other. Every time that Ponselle had a performance, a telephone call would come to the opera house that the heat was to be turned off on the ladies' side. Other prima donnas complained bitterly, but Ponselle was Ponselle, and she had her way. I think the only time in her career that Ponselle was truly unhappy was occasioned by the controversy which arose over her portrayal of Carmen. Quickly, I must add that I liked it, and I am glad that her performance is on records in an album made available by the Metropolitan Opera Guild. Her Carmen was different, but whenever, even now, the subject of Poncelle's Carmen comes up, I always say, tell me one Carmen in operatic history who was not controversial. Everyone has his own preconceived idea of what the cigarette girl should be, and it is to any artist's credit that she brings something new and different to the part. When Marion Telva passed away, I had the sad responsibility of telephoning the news to Miss Ponselle. She cried over the telephone and said, "Oh, Maestro, my heart is broken." My last contact with this great lady was when she agreed to cooperate on the writing of her autobiography. She sent a representative to my studio in New York to assure me that the visit was authentic, and she sent a most unusual message. I have it before me as I speak to you. It is a card with a photograph of her as Gioconda, and at the bottom of the card is her signature, but not a written signature. She had painted her lips with bright red lipstick, and she kissed the card so that the impression of her lips, bright red, would be her official signature. I was fortunate enough to hear every opera Rosa Ponselle appeared in at the Metropolitan from 1925 on. This I count as a blessing. There are no words to describe her greatness. It is a tribute to her that she used to the fullest the priceless gift of a voice given to her by God. She was a dedicated artist, and to those who knew her well, a true and devoted friend.
Thank you, Edwin McArthur.